September 18th, 1989. A heavy, unnatural silence had settled over the quiet suburban streets near Ford and Godfredson in Canton Township, Michigan. Roy Miller, a burly construction worker, was the first to break it. Two sharp, chilling cracks, gunshots, made him swerve his pickup. Then he saw it, a blue car with a white vinyl top peeling away, tires throwing gravel into the fading light. Minutes passed, and then Officer David Jenkins came upon a gruesome scene. A woman face down, partially hidden in the tall grass that lines the roadside. Her name was Beverly Wivell. Her purse was missing, her shoes scuffed, but strangely, almost no blood was there. Her life hadn't ended here later on. Beverly's own car, a Ford Fairmont, was found abandoned at Griffin Park. The engine was still running, the driver's door wide open. This young mother had been shot, sexually assaulted, and left for dead. Any hope that she had simply walked away or been in an accident evaporated with that grim truth. Just hours earlier, she had been full of quiet strength, of plans and dreams. Now she was gone. The first assumption, that this was a random roadside incident, crumbled under scrutiny. Whoever had done this had been meticulous, careful, almost surgical. The crime scene was chillingly precise, leaving few immediate clues. Beverly Wivell's murder haunted Michigan for 35 years, and her life was stolen too soon, leaving a young son, Dale, and her parents, Franklin and Eleanor Wivell, grasping for answers that never came. But before we dive deeper into this shocking story, take a moment to hit subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring these forgotten stories back to light. And trust me, the algorithm gods will make sure you don't miss future uploads. Beverly's death sent a jolt through suburban Michigan. It became a grim reminder that darkness can lurk in plain sight, even in the most serene neighborhoods. Fast forward to 2024, and the whispers of old injustice finally found a voice. Thanks to advances in DNA technology, investigators didn't just uncover traces of a crime. They uncovered a person, a predator with a disturbing past, who had blended seamlessly into Michigan's communities for decades, hiding monstrous secrets behind the mask of ordinary life. This case underlines the tireless dedication of the families who refused to give up hope, the unrelenting commitment of detectives who would not allow time to erase the truth, and the transforming power of modern forensic science to finally give voice to those long silenced, the usually tranquil streets of Canton Township would never be the same. In the place of comfort, fear, suspicion, and the feeling of vulnerability took precedence. And for 35 years, one chilling truth remained. A key figure with a dark history had gone undetected, living a facade of normalcy while hiding unspeakable acts. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach and how they connect us across the miles. On September 18th, 1989, the late summer air carried a deceptive crispness. Maple leaves were just beginning to blush with autumn, yet the morning still held a gentle warmth. Life in the suburbs felt predictable, safe, until that fragile calm was shattered. In a modest two-story house on the quieter outskirts of Ann Arbor, Franklin Wivell was already up. The smell of coffee mingled with Eleanor Wivell's toast as their grandson Dale, a lanky 13-year-old with a perpetually rumpled look, wrestled with his alarm clock upstairs-downstairs. Beverly Wivell moved with quiet efficiency, a routine honed from years of managing chaos. At 31, she carried a quiet strength. Her brown hair was usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, her eyes soft but often shadowed with worry, yet they lit up when she looked at her son. Beverly had been divorced from Jeremy Thorne for over a year. The separation had not been clean, leaving her emotionally drained and financially stretched. Jeremy was volatile and unyielding, and he had not made their separation easy. He had dragged out the court proceedings, keeping Beverly on edge constantly. Dale, their only child, lived with Franklin and Eleanor. It was a decision born of stability, a small island of safety amid the turbulence of Beverly's life. She loved her son fiercely. He was her anchor, but rebuilding her life had proved harder than she anticipated. Beverly longed for stability, a secure job, a place she and Dale could call home, a fresh start free from the shadows of her past marriage. Yet her reality fell short of that dream. Though she had a small apartment in Canton, She often drifted, sometimes staying at her parents' house, sometimes moving between other temporary arrangements. At times, Beverly would spend nights at her boyfriend Carl Henderson's apartment or with other acquaintances, particularly on evenings when arguments with her parents over Carl were heightened or when her apartment seemed too lonely and Carl wasn't there. Dale, more direct as teenage boys can be, had made it clear he didn't want his mom bringing her boyfriend to her parents' house. That understanding, coupled with silent disapproval from her parents, meant Beverly seldom spent the night there, even when visiting. This morning, however, was different. She had stayed to make sure Dale got to school on time. "Morning, sleepyhead," Beverly called as Dale finally shuffled down the stairs, rubbing his eyes. His long brown hair, much like his mother's, fell across his forehead. "5 more minutes," he mumbled, grabbing a piece of toast off the counter. Beverly smiled, her heart tugged by love and guilt. "No can do, big guy. We've got a tight schedule. Got to get you to Canton Middle on time." She glanced at her watch. 8:15 a.m., Franklin Wivell, taciturn but deep in his feelings, cleared his throat from behind his morning newspaper. "Everything ready, Bev? All set, Dad?" Beverly gave him a quick, affectionate pat on the shoulder. Eleanor appeared from the pantry, a worried frown on her face. She often fretted over Beverly's unsettled life and her fragile attempts to rebuild. "You'll call me later, won't you, dear?" "Of course, Mom," Beverly said, hugging her tightly. "I'm going to follow up on that job lead at the library. Wish me luck." She winked, trying to inject optimism into her voice. A few minutes later, Beverly's blue Ford Fairmont, its white vinyl top showing the wear of Michigan winters, pulled out of the driveway. Dale sat in the passenger seat, already lost in thought, likely thinking ahead to the day's school drama. Beverly kept an eye on the road, eyes darting occasionally to her son, memorizing the slump of his backpack against the seat. It was a simple, ordinary moment that would soon become a ghost in the family's memory. By 8:30 a.m., they arrived at Canton Middle School. "All right, sport, have a great day," Beverly said, leaning over to kiss the top of Dale's head. "Yeah, you too, Mom," he said, grabbing his backpack. He turned back, and with a momentary hesitation, gave her a hug, a rare public display of affection from a 13-year-old. "Love you. Love you more," Beverly whispered, a lump beginning to form in her throat. Dale opened the car door and joined the stream of students flowing into the brick building. Beverly waited until he was inside before taking a deep breath herself. Her next destination was the library, to inquire about a job. She had time to kill and no other place she especially wanted to be, so drove a short ways into a quieter part of Canton Township. Pulling over, she let the late summer warmth fill the car. It was comfortable enough inside that she could rest her eyes for a few minutes, clear her head before facing the day. But this morning's fragile calm would soon shatter. Just before 9 a.m., a sharp, chilling sound pierced the suburban quiet near Ford and Gottfredson roads. The unmistakable crack of gunfire. Roy Miller, a burly construction worker with a thick mustache, was heading to a job site on Gottfredson Road. Sipping from a thermos of coffee, he navigated his pickup through the residential streets when the abrupt blast made him jerk the wheel. 2 distinct shots, maybe 3. His eyes scanned the area, but he saw nothing at first. Then from a clump of overgrown bushes and scrub just off the road, a blue car with a white vinyl top peeled away, tires spitting gravel. It looked like an older model, maybe a Ford Fairmont. The driver was indistinct, hidden behind tinted windows, but clearly in a hurry. Startled, Roy didn't follow. He told himself it was probably hunters or kids with firecrackers. But something about it unsettled him. By the time he reached the construction site, unease lingered, and he decided to call the Canton Township Police Department. "Yeah, I just heard some shots near Ford and Gottfredson," Roy told the dispatcher, his voice shaky. "Some old blue car with a white top just tore out of there." The call hit the Canton Township Police Department at 9 a.m. Within minutes, a patrol car with flashing lights sped toward the reported location. Officer David Jenkins, a young patrolman with barely 2 years on the force, arrived first. He exited his cruiser cautiously, hand hovering near his sidearm. Distant traffic and birdsong did little to ease the tension. The air hung heavy. There was no immediate sign of trouble. Then he saw it, partially hidden in the tall, dry grass by the roadside. A figure was lying prone, utterly still. As he drew closer, the image began to coalesce into a terrible tableau. A woman in everyday garb, unmoving. Officer Jenkins's breath suddenly caught in his throat. The sight of Beverly's unmoving body caught in his throat. Officer Jenkins radioed for backup in an ambulance without a second thought, his voice tight with urgency. Female victim down, appears to be a gunshot wound. Requesting Detective Sergeant Luke and the forensic team immediately. Looks like a homicide. Within the hour, the intersection of Ford and Gottfredson roads had transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Yellow crime scene tape snapped tautly against utility poles, cordoning off the area. Patrol cars blocked traffic, their red and blue lights painting the suburban foliage in harsh, pulsating hues. Detectives and uniformed officers swarmed the scene, their movements precise, grim, and methodical. Detective Casey Luke, a veteran investigator with the Washington County Sheriff's Office, arrived alongside his partner, Detective Serena Ulbrich. Luke, in his late 40s, with a gaze sharpened by years of experience but weighed down by exhaustion, knelt beside the body. His face reflected somber concentration. The victim, Beverly Wivell, lay there, her purse missing, her shoes scuffed, as if she had struggled or perhaps been dragged. But as the forensic examination got underway, headed by technician Eileen Kelly, a jarring inconsistency leapingly stood out. The point-blank gunshot to the chest was obvious, but the lack of blood was stunning, far less than one might expect from a close-range shot that had killed someone instantly. The surrounding grass, though disturbed, wasn't saturated with crimson as it should have been. "Casey, look at this," Eileen called, her tone grim. She peered closely at Beverly's clothing. "See the drag marks? The scuffing on her jacket? This isn't where she died." Luke's eyes narrowed as his gaze swept over the quiet suburban roadside. The initial assumption that this was the primary murder scene began to crumble. "So she was killed elsewhere, then dumped here," he said quietly, straightening. The gunshots the witness heard could have been a final shot, an execution, or just a distraction. This complicates things. The mere thought that Beverly had been attacked, killed, and then moved brought forth a grim visualization of a perpetrator who acted in cold, calculated precision. This quiet suburban street, designed to be a rest from life, was now a desecrated last stop for her. Investigators fanned out. Questioning neighbors, few had seen anything beyond the blue and white car speeding away. The usually tranquil community stirred uneasily. Hours later, another critical piece fell into place. A patrol unit discovered a blue Ford Fairmont with a white vinyl top, engine running, driver's door open, and a woman's purse sitting neatly on the front seat. The car had been abandoned at Griffin Park, a secluded spot favored by teenagers and dog walkers, several miles from where Beverly's body had been found. A quick check confirmed the registration. It was Beverly Wivell's car. The sight of the running, yet empty vehicle deepened the chilling mystery surrounding Beverly's final hours. The abandoned car at Griffin Park confirmed the grim hypothesis investigators had. The scene at Ford and Gottfredson roads was not where Beverly had truly met her end. The intact car, engine still humming, purse untouched, spoke of a crime that was both abrupt and unsettlingly personal. For the police now, there were two distinct crime scenes, each holding pieces of the puzzle, but neither revealing the full picture. Forensic technician Eileen Kelly meticulously processed every inch of Beverly's Fairmont, lifting fingerprints off the steering wheel and door handles. Fiber samples were collected from the seats and all trace evidence was bagged. The purse was still in the car, containing cash and Beverly's identification. Immediately, robbery was ruled out. This wasn't a carjacking gone wrong. This was something far darker. The driver's door, found ajar, suggested a hurried departure, either under duress or forced by a killer in haste. Back at the Washington County Sheriff's Office, Detective Luke and Detective Ulbrich pored over the preliminary findings. When the autopsy report arrived the following day, the horror intensified. Beverly Wivell had not only been shot in the chest, but another .45 caliber bullet had been fired into her mouth, a brutal execution-style wound, often meant to silence a victim or as an expression of extreme rage. The report also confirmed what the crime scene had hinted at. Beverly had been sexually assaulted. A sexual assault kit, along with other trace evidence, had been carefully collected, potentially yielding DNA, a nascent science in 1989. Her murder in Canton Township was a brutal, senseless crime in a quiet, unsuspecting community that had thought itself safe. The fact that something so terrible could have occurred on quiet suburban streets was nearly unimaginable. Cold, insidious fear began seeping in. Residents who had previously left doors unlocked began to double-check latches. Children playing outdoors were called in earlier safe. Familiar rhythms of daily life were shattered. The local media, led by Canton Chronicle reporter Brenda Mason, plastered Beverly's photo across front pages. Her gentle, tired eyes stared from the newsprint, a familiar face now marked by tragedy. Everyone knew Beverly Wivell, or at least knew of her, a mother, a neighbor, someone quietly struggling to get by. Her violent end felt like a violation of the community's unspoken peace. For Franklin and Eleanor Wivell, the news was catastrophic. Their quiet home in Ann Arbor became a place of unbearable grief. Dale Swanson, their 13-year-old grandson, was utterly devastated. Just hours earlier, he had shared a normal morning goodbye with his mother. Now he was confronting a reality no child should ever face. She just dropped me off, Dale choked out, his voice hoarse from crying. She said she loved me. Franklin, normally impassive, held his grandson close, tears streaming down his face, helpless to comfort him. Eleanor wandered the house in a daze, clutching photographs of Beverly, repeating her daughter's name. Detectives Luke and Ulbrich immediately began interviewing Beverly's friends, family, and acquaintances. Her ex-husband, Jeremy Thorne, was among the first questioned. A stocky man with a quick temper, he was cooperative yet visibly angry, insisting on his innocence with a belligerence that made the detectives wary. He claimed he had been at work that morning, a claim initially confirmed by his employer but later scrutinized. Luke, seasoned in handling volatile ex-spouses, knew better than to dismiss him too quickly. Beverly's boyfriend, Carl Henderson, a local truck driver known to frequent bars, also provided an alibi, claiming he had been out of town on a delivery. Neither man had any concrete evidence tying them directly to the crime. "We're looking for someone who knew her," Detective Luke told a small gathering of deputies and investigators. "Someone familiar with her routine, someone who knew she might be in her car alone after dropping off her son." The execution-style shot, the sexual assault, this wasn't random, not entirely. Investigators cast a wide net. Every lead, however tenuous, was pursued. Patrol units combed the areas around Ford and Gottfredson Roads in Griffin Park, searching for anything that might have been missed: a discarded shell casing, a scrap of clothing, a personal item. Forensic teams meticulously examined all retrieved evidence to hopefully turn up a definitive fingerprint or a unique fiber. Public appeals went out. Posters featuring Beverly's face appeared on lampposts and bulletin boards across Canton and Ann Arbor. A reward fund was established by concerned citizens, coordinated by Community Watch organizer Cheryl Benson. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and leads dissolved into dead ends. Jeremy Thorne's alibi, though suspicious early on, held up to further investigation. Carl Henderson's story seemed solid too. No fingerprints emerged from the car that proved conclusive, and trace evidence from the sexual assault kit, though gathered with such painstaking care, yielded no matches with 1989 DNA technology. The blue car with a white vinyl top, described by Roy Miller, was Beverly's own vehicle. That meant the perpetrator either drove it away and abandoned it or forced her to drive it before leaving her for dead. But the identity of that perpetrator remained stubbornly elusive. As the first chill of winter swept through Michigan, blanketing Canton in pristine snow, the active investigation was grinding to a crawl. Detective Luke was holding weekly meetings, but the whiteboard at the Washington County Sheriff's Office, once overcrowded with arrows and names of suspects, was now filled with dead ends. The public outrage and fear that had surged early on slowly ebbed into a cold undercurrent of unease. The Canton Chronicle relegated Beverly's story from front-page headlines to occasional mentions. The case of Beverly Wivell became another name whispered in the halls of the sheriff's office, a file thick with notes and dead ends, slowly sliding into the grim category of cold case. It wasn't until early January 1990 that a new lead came in. An anonymous tip called into the sheriff's office suggested taking a closer look at Walter. Wally Henderson, a second cousin of Carl Henderson. Wally was a petty criminal with a history of minor assaults and a penchant for hanging around parks. He drove an older model blue car, different make but with a similar white vinyl top. More importantly, Wally had been seen in Griffin Park from time to time, and several neighbors remembered him acting jumpy around the time of the murder. Desperate for a breakthrough, detectives struck quickly. On a chilly gray morning, Detective Luke and Ulbrich, accompanied by two uniformed officers, descended upon the rundown mobile home of Wally Henderson on the outskirts of Ypsilanti. Wally was an emaciated man, with eyes that darted toward everything but anything confronted directly. He insisted he had been out of town or kept to himself during the time the murder took place. But with relentless questioning and the description of the blue and white car and known haunts, sweat started to bead on his brow. He was brought in for questioning, his face splashed across local news broadcasts as a potential suspect. For the community and painfully for the Wivell family, it sparked a fragile flicker of hope. Franklin and Eleanor, watching the evening news, saw Wally's mugshot and allowed themselves a cautious, guarded sense of relief. Dale, now navigating the new school year, heard whispers from classmates and for the first time in months felt the weight on his young shoulders ease just a little. Justice perhaps might finally be within reach. But that hope was short-lived. What had initially been a vague alibi for Wally Henderson began to solidify under scrutiny. His girlfriend, Loretta Vance, had a detailed account of their whereabouts on September 18th, supported by phone records and a witness that placed them at a bingo hall miles away from Canton. Crucially, forensic analysis of hair and fiber samples taken from Wally's car and clothing yielded no match to Beverly. After intense interrogation, Wally's story held. Lacking direct physical evidence or a broken alibi, the police had no choice but to release him. The public outcry was swift and disheartened, with the Canton Chronicle assailing the police for rushing to arrest a suspect as the Wivell family felt the cruel sting of dashed hope. The tantalizing glimpse of possible closure had been snatched away from them, and an even deeper chasm of despair now faced them. This setback came as a harsh, searing reminder of how far they were still away from the truth. After the crushing disappointment of Wally Henderson's release, the Beverly Wivell case settled into a long, agonizing silence. Leads that seemed promising had vanished. The initial fervor of the investigation dissipated. The trail was impossibly cold. Yellowed files, once meticulously reviewed, were carefully boxed and placed into the cold case archives of the Washington County Sheriff's Office for Detective Casey Luke. Beverly's case became a silent torment, a grim reminder of an unsolved puzzle that once had consumed his waking hours. He would occasionally pull the file, edges worn from countless readings, flipping through faded reports, hoping some overlooked detail, some hidden clue, would leap out at him, but it never did. The years tended to bleed into one another, making months feel like decades. The 1990s turned into the 2000s, then the 2010s. Canton Township, like so many suburban communities, continued its growth and expansion. But the unsolved murder of Beverly Wivell still lingered on a wound that never seemed to heal. Time brought neither Franklin nor Eleanor reprieve. Beverly's absence remained an unhealed scar. They were aging, their energy sapped over time by unremitting grief. Eleanor sat mostly by the window, looking at the rose bush Beverly had planted years ago, her eyes clouded by unspoken pain. Franklin tried hard to stay strong for his wife and his grandson, but deep inside his heart lay a sorrow that was growing with every passing year. The weight of decades eventually proved too much. In the late 2000s, Franklin Wivell, having had almost 20 years of unanswered questions, passed away quietly in his sleep. His final moments were spent without the justice he had desperately sought for his daughter. Eleanor was already fragile and never truly recovered from the dual loss of her daughter and her lifelong companion. Her health rapidly degraded. Grief compounded the physical toll, and she joined him not long after. Their deaths left Dale Swanson as the single torchbearer of the family's enduring hope. The cheerful 13-year-old had grown into a quiet, introspective young man, carrying his grief alone through the 2010s, haunted by the memory of that last goodbye. "Love you more," his mother had whispered, words that now echoed with agonizing finality. Every year on September 18, the anniversary of her death, was a bleak, silent reminder. He finished school, went on to college, and eventually started a family of his own, but the hole his mother's murder had left in his life remained. He occasionally joined others at community memorials for victims of unsolved crimes, carrying always a small framed picture of Beverly, the smiling face contrasting sharply with the burdened look in his eyes. He did not expect miracles, just answers. Who took her from us? Why? The questions became a constant, silent torment. The cold case unit, always underfunded and overwhelmed at the Washington County Sheriff's Office, considered Beverly's file to be one of many tragedies. New cases came and went. But the Wivell file, marked early September 1989, remained. While the case of Beverly Wivell had remained intransigently cold for decades, a silent revolution was building in forensic science, DNA technology. In its infancy when Beverly was murdered, was advancing at an astonishing rate. What had been impossible in 1989, building a definitive profile from degraded samples, was, with each passing year, increasingly feasible. Then came 2024. 35 years since Beverly's life was brutally cut short, the world had changed beyond recognition. Smartphones, the internet, and a hyper-connected global society felt light years away from the late 80s. But one thing stayed the same: the enduring pain of the Wivell family and the lingering injustice of an unsolved murder, compelled by the renewed commitment of the newly appointed Chief of Detectives, Austin Pearson. The Washington County Sheriff's Office chose a milestone path. It would reopen Beverly Wivell's cold case, but this time with the power of modern forensic science. The sharp, progressive Detective Austin Pearson had joined years after Beverly's murder and immediately recognized potential in the well-preserved sexual assault kit from 1989, even though it was inadequate for analysis at the time. Now he knew it could be the key. He secured funding and authorization to work with the Michigan State Police to send the evidence to Othram, a forensic genomics lab in Texas that had become known for cracking decades-old cold cases using sophisticated DNA techniques, including forensic genealogy. Othram was then facing an unprecedented number of decades-old cases from agencies all over the country. A testament to its groundbreaking reputation, Beverly's case became one of hundreds waiting for analysis. The process at Othram was painstaking. Scientists in sterile labs, humming with sophisticated machinery, began the delicate work of extracting DNA from the decades-old sexual assault kit. Using next-generation sequencing, they painstakingly rebuilt degraded genetic material in a bid to build a complete DNA profile. This wasn't just about comparing a couple of markers. It was mapping an entire genome, something that to the investigators who had worked on the original case seemed like the stuff of science fiction. After weeks of hard work, the Othram team delivered the breakthrough that had eluded investigators for 35 years. A robust male DNA profile extracted from the 1989 sample. The next step was forensic genealogy. This innovative technique didn't require a direct match within criminal databases like CODIS. Instead, the unknown profile is compared with several large publicly available genealogical databases where people have submitted their DNA for ancestry research. These distant, familiar links allow Othram expert genealogists to construct intricate family trees, narrowing down potential suspects generation by generation. The results sent a jolt through the Washington County Sheriff's Office. Genealogical analysis pointed to one family tree sprawling across Michigan, and at the center of that tree emerged a name previously obscure in the context of the original 1989 investigation, but soon to become synonymous with Beverly Wivell's final, horrifying moments. Buster Robbins. Investigators quickly learned that, in his mid-60s by then, Buster Robbins lived in Almont, Michigan, a small town in Lapeer County, roughly an hour and a half to 2 hours northeast of Canton Township. Local records and statements pegged him as having been settled there many years since the 1990s, living an unremarkable life with his wife. He had even served as a reserve officer in the mounted unit of the Macomb County Sheriff's Office around 1989. A chilling layer of irony that made his profile all the more disturbing. Chief of Detectives Austin Pearson called his team together for an emergency meeting. "We have a name," he said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "Buster Robbins. Now we need to tie him directly to Beverly Wivell. The next stage was the most sensitive one. Getting DNA from Buster Robbins without his knowing it, without a warrant, it's an extremely delicate, legally fraught process called stealth DNA collection. The cold case was thawing in a hurry, a face coming into focus from out of the darkness. Chief Pearson recognized that the DNA match to Robbins was a monumental breakthrough. But only the beginning. What he needed was direct evidence, a modern DNA sample from Robbins himself, obtained legally and meticulously. The Washington County Sheriff's Office, working in conjunction with the Michigan State Police, launched a surreptitious surveillance operation on Robbins' Almont residence, Detective Serena Ulbrich, joined by newly assigned surveillance officer Robert Rob Miller, kept a very discreet watch on the daily routine of Buster Robbins' Almont, a small town with its quiet rhythm, offered but a few hiding places, but Robbins seemed oblivious to the eyes being in place upon him. He lived an unassuming life with his wife, with days structured by habit and routine. For several tense days, the team waited for an opportunity. Then on a crisp afternoon, Robbins emerged from his home, walked to his mailbox, and on the way back, absent-mindedly tossed a used plastic drinking straw into his curbside recycling bin. It was the break they needed. Officer Miller, disguised as a utility worker, made a timely pass, deftly retrieving the straw. Later that week, another opportunity arose. While at a local gas station, Robbins discarded a coffee cup into a public trash can. Each item was carefully sealed, transported, and rushed to the Michigan State Police Forensic Lab. The lab buzzed with controlled urgency as technicians meticulously extracted DNA from the discarded straw and coffee cup. The air was thick with tension, and then, when the definitive match appeared on the screens, it was a moment of profound vindication. Buster Robbins' DNA profile was identical to the male DNA recovered from Beverly Wivell's sexual assault kit in 1989. 35 years of silence, anguish, and unanswered questions had finally found a voice in the undeniable language of genetics. An arrest warrant was quickly obtained. Building on the DNA evidence in the decades-old cold case file, a joint task force from the Washington County Sheriff's Office and the Michigan State Police converged on Buster Robbins' Almont home on the morning of November 21, 2024. The quiet suburban street awoke to unmarked cars and uniformed officers. Buster Robbins, now in his mid-60s, was taken into custody without incident. Stunned, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror, muttering, "What is this about?" as handcuffs clicked shut. A .45 caliber magazine and ammunition, consistent with the type of weapon used in Beverly's murder, were found during a search of his residence, a chilling piece of corroborating evidence. Even more disturbing, a preliminary review of his electronic devices, to include a tablet, revealed allegations related to child pornography and further solidified the prosecution's view of him as a dangerous individual. News of Robbins' arrest sent shockwaves through Canton Township and far beyond. The local news channels cut into regular programming to flash Robbins' mugshot alongside a decades-old photo of Beverly Wivell. The call from Chief of Detectives Austin Pearson was seismic for Dale Swanson, now in his late 40s. He listened to the news in stunned silence as Pearson's voice broke with the weight of grief, relief, and a flood of emotions he had kept buried for decades. His mother's killer finally had a name. The community reacted with a mixture of outrage and fragile vindication. People remembered the terror of 1989, the fear that gripped the quiet streets. Many were stunned to learn that Robbins had even served as a reserve officer with the Macomb County Sheriff's Office around the time of the murder. He was a reserve officer? That's unthinkable. Evelyn Cross, a long-timer from Canton, whispered to the reporter of the Canton Chronicle. Brenda Mason, her face pale with shock. To think he was hiding in plain sight all these years. Buster Robbins was formally charged in connection with the sexual assault and murder of Beverly Wivell. In June 2025, after a preliminary court hearing in the Washington County Courthouse, the judge ruled there was enough probable cause for the case to go to a higher court. Robbins, looking stoic but visibly tense, formally entered a plea of not guilty. His defense attorney, Tim Turkelson, immediately asked for bail. He said other than the DNA evidence, there was little linking Robbins directly to the murder, and that DNA could have come from a consensual relationship. A line of argument designed to raise doubts in the prosecution's case. Washington County Prosecutor Eli Savit countered fervently, emphasizing the heinous nature of the crime, the execution-style shooting, and added allegations against Robbins, including child pornography. He asserted that Robbins was an extreme flight risk and a danger to the community. The judge agreed with this contention by issuing an extremely high bond, effectively keeping Robbins detained pending trial. As of late 2025, the case remains pretrial. The last pretrial hearing is expected for January 2026. The trial will start in February. The wait for Dale Swanson continues, but it's now a wait suffused with an altogether very different kind of hope. Decades of agonizing silence were finally broken. A name came out of the darkness. The Wivell family and the community of Canton Township now brace for the arduous legal battle ahead, knowing that while justice has been profoundly delayed, its pursuit is now relentless. The outcome is not yet written, but the story of Beverly Wivell, once a cold case, is now fiercely alive, demanding its final, long overdue chapter.